looks like President Biden's going to spend the Winter Olympics the same way as most of the rest of us, watching it here on NBC, because he's not going, and neither will any other top U.S. official. It's a so-called diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Games to protest a whole bunch of China's human rights abuses. And keep in mind, America hasn't done something like this in more than 40 years. So is this just the start? That's not the only international drama going down tonight, because we hear the president's not going to hold back in tomorrow's call with Vladimir Putin, threatening big-time sanctions if Russia invades Ukraine. We're live overseas. Plus, Justice Smolette, he's trying to convince a jury today why he shouldn't go to prison. He says the check he used to pay one of the guys accused of helping him stage a fake attack was for personal training, but prosecutors have the receipts. And our Andrea Mitchell has the backstory tonight, what it was like covering Senate Majority Leader Bob Dole. As we've learned in just the last few hours, he'll get one of the country's highest honors, lying in state at the Capitol. And I'm guessing you've probably spent some part of your workday taking a peek at TikTok. Don't worry, you're not alone. A lot of us can't get enough. Turns out that's the point. What we're learning about the video app's addictive algorithm later in the show. Hey, I'm Hallie, and we're coming on the air with that news that a lot of people are talking about tonight, this boycott of the Winter Games. The athletes are going to head overseas to Beijing, but U.S. diplomats will not. So listen, let's be real. It's not like this is going to affect the actual outcome of the competition, right? The athletes will still go. But pulling the official delegation of leaders and politicians, the people who go to the opening and closing ceremonies, that sends what the Biden administration says is a, quote, clear message about their position, that they don't support China's human rights abuses, like China holding more than 1 million Uyghurs in prison camps, China silencing pro-democracy protests, China handling Tibet and Taiwan, which the U.S. has some concerns about. Now, the last time the U.S. boycotted the Games, the last time we talked about something like this, was back in 1980. That was a Moscow thing. But here's the deal. That was an actual boycott. Players literally did not show up to compete. This is totally different. This time around, you're still going to be able to see athletes like Michaela Schifrin and Shaun White if they qualify, and they almost certainly will. So while the White House says they are sending that clear message by holding back diplomats, is it a strong enough one? We have Monica Alba at the White House and Sam Brock in Florida for us. So, Mon, let me start with you here. Some members of Congress wanted the White House to go even further than this. They wanted a total boycott. So talk about what you're hearing about why the White House made this call. And listen, are they ruling out an all-out boycott? Do we know that this is as far as they're going to go?
It does seem to be, Hallie, that this is where they're going to draw the line, and it's because they can do that. They can send a clear message while, in their view, not penalizing the athletes who've worked so hard to get to this place in order to qualify and then participate in the Olympic Games. Bottom line, that's what the White House said today. They didn't feel it was appropriate to have to ban all of them, but they did feel that on the world stage, sending a message to China that they will not support these human rights abuses by not contributing to the fanfare of the Games is something that's important enough for them to do. And there were many lawmakers who urged more action. There were some who did say, though, this would be an important first step. And it seems that's exactly what the White House is doing. As we've often seen, sports and politics do tend to mix, but perhaps no greater way than on the world stage as in the Winter Games that start in early February.
The least surprising news, perhaps, of the evening, Monica, is that China is not thrilled with this, right? No kidding. They say the Olympics are not this stage for political manipulation. They're going to take some of these countermeasures. What does that even mean? How much more pressure is this putting on the U.S. relationship with China, which, as we've talked about before, as it relates to economic measures, for example, is an important one?
They're accusing the U.S. here of grandstanding, and we know that just a couple of weeks ago, Presidents Biden and Xi held this nearly 3-hour virtual summit. But I'm told that this was not a topic of conversation, that they didn't discuss the Winter Games during that, but that this was something that the U.S. had signaled was possible. We knew the president was considering it for weeks, but it comes at a time when this is a very delicate relationship. But the White House and the president saying it doesn't matter. It's more important to us to send this message, to be very clear to China. But of course, it does raise the question, what happens the next time President Biden and Xi are scheduled to speak? Because there's so many other issues when it comes to competitiveness, when it comes to cybersecurity, that is important for this relationship. But they do believe that will still be able to go on constructively despite all of this over the political angle to these really Winter Games, again, that the athletes have worked so hard to be a part of. And that is something the White House wants to still see.
So, Sam, I know you're with us, and you know this well because you saw these athletes competing at the Summer Games at the Tokyo Olympics, right? Then you and I talked on a different platform about the protests there inside Japan as it relates to COVID. Now here we have Beijing. The pressure is coming from outside the U.S., right? Talk to me about how your experience there tells you something about what we're seeing now at this point.
Right. These are not analogous situations, Hallie, though, as Monica was alluding to a second ago, the sort of commonality here is you have a major international event that's based on unity and competition that can also prove to be a platform for global concerns. What we saw in Tokyo was a majority of the population at that time internally applying pressure because they did not want the games to move forward, given how fragile of a state that Tokyo and Japan were in general at that point with COVID. In fact, we saw COVID cases start to rise in the days and weeks in which the Olympics were held. That was the concern. There weren't those narratives of hospitals that were overflooded, but people very much concerned about what impact this would have on the health of the country. With Beijing, it is an international pressure, condemnation globally, right? But the United States is leading this diplomatic ban. That's what's going on with the U.S. leading the way. The question is, though, will other allies from European nations like France or Great Britain, will they join in? So far, they have not. But the bottom line with China is there are a series of episodes that have happened over the course of years, whether that is the subjugation and internment of 1 million plus Uyghurs and other ethnic and religious minorities there, whether it's the crackdown of free speech in Hong Kong, or, of course, the international superstar, Chinese superstar tennis player Peng Shuai, who went missing for weeks after she had voiced concerns about sexual assault at the hands of a member of the Chinese Communist Party. All of these things have stricken issues with human rights abuses, and in the words of the Biden administration, genocide as it concerns the Uyghurs, Hallie.
Listen, Sam, no one's going to mistake us for ESPN, right? But we have covered sports a lot on this show, most of the time with you, and that intersection of sports and politics as it relates to Peng Shuai, who you just talked about. China is now seeing, sports and politics on the world stage, and it's frankly not in a very flattering light for them.
Hallie, I apologize right now. I'm having a bit of a hard time hearing you. I think you asked about Peng Shuai, though, and sort of the very divergent response that's going on right now. You have the Women's Tennis Association, the WTA, that said we're going to postpone all international events in China for the foreseeable future because we don't feel safe about our tennis players playing abroad in China. They said they made multiple attempts to try to reach Peng and were unsuccessful. The IOC, on the other hand, has come out and said they've not only reached Peng a couple of different times, but set up a dinner between the IOC president, Thomas Bach, and Peng a week before the Olympics. How could these two things be happening concurrently at the same time? What is the state of China when it comes to hosting world events moving forward? The issue here, how will the international community react when there is not this spotlight on Beijing and on the Olympics? Will China have a price to pay? But for the time being, clearly the country is under the microscope when it comes to human rights abuses. Hallie?
Sam Brock, I have no idea if you can hear me right now, but we heard you loud and clear. It's an important point. It's great reporting. Monica Alba, same to you as well from the White House. Thanks, Mon. The investigation into who knew what when in that Michigan school shooting is getting more and more intense. Right now, as we speak, right now, police are interviewing an artist who let the parents of the suspected shooter hang out in his art studio in Detroit, even while the FBI, while U.S. Marshals were on a manhunt for these parents to charge them with manslaughter. Well, now, this artist could end up facing charges, too. His attorney is planning to release a statement, we think any minute, any second here, really. Earlier, he said this guy had no idea the Crumblies were on the run. Listen.
I don't believe there's going to be evidence that shows that Mr. Sikora knew or had reason to know that charges were issued or that there were warrants out for their arrest. The minute he found out, he went to the Detroit Police Department and immediately wanted to give them information.
It comes as the school district's superintendent there in Oakland County has asked for an independent investigation into the shootings. It comes after evidence the prosecution laid out last week about what teachers caught the suspect doing before the shooting, why he was allowed to go back to class. Remember, this is the drawing, the journal entries that the suspected shooter had made in the hours before the shooting. Ellison Barber, you see her here. She's following it all for us from Michigan. Ellison, there's a lot here. So let me kind of unspool it with you thread by thread. And let's start with this artist. His studio is kind of close to the Canadian border. He was friends with the Crumblies, but he now says, hey, I didn't know they were hiding out. How did he get involved in this?
Yeah, so his attorney says that they had a prior relationship, the Crumbleys and this artist whose name is Andrei Shakura. But his attorney says that it was not a super close one, that they had some shared hobbies. He claims that his client reached out to them initially just offering condolences, not totally knowing the extent of what had happened. And that through that conversation, he then offered them a place to stay in his art studio. Let you hear it directly from this individual's attorney. Listen.
Mr. Shakura contacted them giving condolences, not knowing that they were involved. And then when he learned that they were involved, they told him they needed a safe place to stay because they were receiving so many death threats at their home. He definitely didn't know that they were fugitives at that point. It was only until the next day after they were arrested and he woke up and was contacted that his building was involved that he finally learned what actually was going on.
Police on Friday had been very public, putting a lookout out to the public from car description on, saying that they are looking for James and Jennifer Crumbly. And despite all of that, this individual, his attorney, says they were not aware of it. The U.S. Marshals had also put a lot of stuff out on their social media. Ultimately, police say they became aware of this location and the possible location of the couple after someone called in a tip because they spotted their car. Hallie.
So still waiting on any word as to any possible consequences this artist may face. The Crumbleys themselves, all three of them, by the way, the son, the suspected shooter, and both parents, they're all at the same jail for now. And then you have what I think is such an important piece of this story, Ellison, that I really can't let you go without talking about, and that is the victims. That is these four kids, these four students who were killed, whose lives were ended way too soon. The funerals for them are happening. There was a funeral for Madison Baldwin, who's one of the victims, yesterday. Visitation is today for another one of the students. The Detroit Lions over the weekend, we saw, had an O on their helmets in this very public display of support for them on the field. Can you tell us a little bit more, as you've been out there, how these students are being remembered, just with so much love and with so many prayers from the community?
Yeah, I mean, as kids, there was a candlelight vigil this weekend. This is a community that is remembering in a lot of ways these four people as what they were, children who had a lot of life ahead of them, who were very much loved by their families. The names, and I think we can probably show you their photos again, because they are absolutely the most important names, the most important faces to remember, even as we appropriately ask and look into a lot of other questions. Madison, Tate, Hannah, and Justin. Tomorrow, Tate Myers will be laid to rest. Visitation for him began today. His funeral, again, takes place tomorrow afternoon. He was just 16 years old. He'd started recently to visit colleges. Madison Baldwin, she was 17. Justin Schilling, 17. Hannah St. Juliana, 14. All of them went to school that day and were gunned down, shot in the hallways of their high school. All of them should have gone home that day to be with their families, and none of them did. And that is something that this community continues to struggle with. And there are no reasonable answers for why they didn't go home that day.
The struggle's not going to end anytime soon. Ellison Barber, thank you for that reporting in that context. So listen, it feels like we keep talking all the time about those new rules for travel because of the pandemic. But today's the day. It is time. They are starting to be enforced today as part of this whole White House push to try and get the pandemic under control, especially since we're seeing more than 100,000 new cases every day. The first time in a couple of months we're seeing these kinds of numbers. And here's the thing. Experts knew this was coming. They saw this winter surge coming a mile away, given everybody traveling for Thanksgiving, et cetera. On Friday alone, you can see it here, nearly 150,000 new cases were reported. And even though the new Omicron variant that we've been talking about is now in nearly 20 states, the CDC says it's actually Delta, that variant, driving the surge right now. Our Tom Costello is here with us on set. We're so glad to have you, Tom, and we're glad you're not stuck out at Dulles or Reagan
Thanks for
at
that.
one of the airports tonight.
Love what you've done with the place, by the way.
Thank you
It's great.
so much,
Very
friend.
nice.
Talk to you about these new travel rules, right? For international travelers, they go into effect now. What's up?
Yeah, so they went into effect at midnight. If you are traveling overseas or if you have a loved one who is, you need to be testing for COVID within 24 hours of your departure from that foreign airport. If you're in London, Paris, Brussels, whatever, Stockholm, you've got to test within 24 hours of departure. You've got to have that negative test. All passengers over the age of 2, including U.S. citizens, now are affected by this. I want to emphasize that, including U.S. citizens. And this applies to whether you've been vaccinated or not vaccinated. You know, the rule up until now had been a 3-day window. Now it's 24 hours. If you aren't if you aren't tested and you don't have the proof, you don't get on the plane.
Can you do the rapid test that you buy at the drugstore? Those are fine?
Yes, and I've done that. I've been, my wife is European.
I know.
I've been overseas, and I've flown back. I had the rapid test.
Yep.
And, however, this is the caveat. You've got to have that rep, the telemedicine rep, watching you on your phone, on your iPhone, your computer, whatever, to make sure you do it right. If they don't watch you do it, the test isn't valid. So wait,
that's a catch. You can do the at-home test, but you have to have somebody watch you. You do travel a fair amount, Tom. We know that. You spend a lot of time at airports.
Yes.
What is the sense you get from people who are traveling, right? I'll be honest, I haven't been at an airport in several months just because work has kept me here.
You got a newborn, too.
Well, almost 2 now, my God. But what is the mood like when you go into these airports?
Well, I've done 25 cities just in the U.S. this year. I've done about 30 if you count international. It's been a crazy year for me. Listen, in the United States, it seems like it's back to normal for the most part. Yeah. People are doing the normal thing. If you're overseas, however, we've been hearing from a lot of Americans overseas who are a little confused by the sudden now onslaught of the new regs. Yep. We've talked to them in the UK, in Brussels, for example, in Ireland, and they all say right now they're just confused. Take a listen.
There's just difficulty having the tests available, being able to process those tests, getting your results back in time. All of that, those just stack up on each other within a 24-hour period.
Yeah, but the bottom line is you can't let it slide. You need to be prepared when you go to the airport. If you're not prepared, if you haven't done the homework in advance and laid the groundwork, you're not boarding your flight. You heard us lay some of those numbers out right before we brought you in here about where cases are, new cases in the U.S. You now have New York City taking a pretty significant move with this private vaccine mandate. So private company vaccine mandate, new rules in place for kids 5 to 11. We've seen court action over this, right, as it relates to the federal level. Mayor Bill de Blasio in New York seems fairly confident, like this is going to hold up in court. What's your sense of how this is going to go? Well, you're right. I mean, he is pretty confident. He says that this is going to hold up in court. And if you're not familiar with the rules, they're essentially now saying every private business, 184,000 private businesses in New York, if you work there, you must be vaccinated at least 1 shot. If you're over the age of 5 up to 11, you can go into a restaurant, but you have to have at least 1 dose of a vaccine. Beyond that, now, as of December 27th, you have to have 2 doses, unless, of course, you have the Johnson & Johnson. Yeah. So they're really kind of setting the bar even higher. And as you know, what they've done very often is kind of set the schedule for other bigger cities. States. Sure. Yeah, and blue cities, yeah. Tom Costello, what a treat to have you here talking us through all this. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. Pleasure to be here. Thanks. You. Turning now to some other news from overseas. And I wonder about this, right? You ever get a little nervous before like a huge, important meeting you have at work? Whatever it is, I can almost guarantee you it is probably not as high stakes as the meeting President Biden has tomorrow with President Putin of Russia, because President Biden is getting ready to deliver a warning right to Putin's virtual face as Putin looks more and more like he's getting ready to move troops into Ukraine. Now, listen, this whole thing's been tense for years now, really since 2014, when Russia invaded the Ukrainian peninsula of Crimea. Well, now there's nearly 90,000 Russian troops on the border, and it's hard to say one way or the other for sure what Putin is planning. The Kremlin is in denial mode. They're saying they're not doing a military buildup, but others worry there's this invasion in the works that could lead to war. Our Keir Simmons is all over these developments, live for us tonight from London. Keir, one of the big things Putin wants here is to keep Ukraine out of NATO, and that's something that the Kremlin is talking about. I know you are not literally living in Vladimir Putin's head, but you are a bit of a Kremlinologist, I should say, for us here at NBC. You've talked to this guy. You've been there. You've spent a lot of time in Moscow. What does he want? What's this play here for him?
It's interesting, Hallie, that interview with President Putin that I did back in June. President Putin harked all the way back to the leader of the Soviet Union, Gorbachev. And he said that Gorbachev was given a guarantee that NATO wouldn't expand eastward across Europe and that the West didn't uphold that guarantee. Now, I said to him, that wasn't given in writing. And he said, yes, you see, the West duped an old man, speaking about Gorbachev. Now, President Putin is determined in his own mind not to be duped in the same way. One of his key objectives is to try to stop NATO from having more of a relationship with Ukraine, perhaps even having Ukraine join NATO. The issue is, and it's a really tricky one, is that for Western Europe and the US, when diplomats in Western Europe and the US talk about Ukrainian sovereignty, one of the things they're talking about is Ukraine's right to be able to join NATO, to be supported by NATO, to be as democratic as it wants to be. That is the needle that has to be thread tomorrow. That is why you're right. President Biden and his team will be still working on what they're going to say.
Well, so talk to me about that, because a top official is telling us and our team that the president's going to issue this warning about the very real costs of military action against Ukraine. What are you hearing from your sources that they actually expect the U.S. to do or to say here? Because any interaction with Vladimir Putin, right, is such a diplomatic dance. Like, it is so intense.
It really is. And there are those, on the other hand, who say that President Putin, and we always say this, has kind of got what he wants just by being able to have a conversation with the American president rather than having to negotiate with the Europeans, or even worse, from Vladimir Putin's point of view, having to negotiate directly with the Ukrainians. So what the Russians have been saying to me through the weekend is that they think this is a negotiation. They are happy about that. You're right to point out that there are these signs that President Biden tomorrow will warn President Putin of the very severe, for example, that Russia might be taken out of the financial, part of the financial system. It's very severe penalties if President Putin launches some kind of an invasion into Ukraine. Believe me, the Russians worry about that. I sat down in October with President Putin's spokesman. The first thing he wanted to talk about was about a new package of sanctions going through Congress. So they do worry about that. At the same time, of course, President Biden needs somehow to give Russia some kind of a roadmap, if you like, some way out of this. That is incredibly tricky. There are reports that President Biden has some thoughts on how to do that. I don't. I'm waiting to see what he comes up with tomorrow.
I'm going to ask you to do the impossible, and this is so annoying and such an annoying news anchor thing to do. In 15 seconds, Keir, can you talk about the Belarus factor in like 2 sentences, right? Because you now have that president saying, hey, maybe we'll get into this fight on Russia's side here, which could complicate things.
Yeah, 15 seconds. Belarus is led by a crazy dictator right next door to Russia and Ukraine. He has said he'll join Russia if Russia goes to war with Ukraine. This isn't just going to be one front. If it really explodes, it's going to be multiple fronts, Hallie.
I knew you could do it. Keir Simmons, you literally never let us down. Thank you so much. I'm so glad to have you live for us from London, watching all of this. I know we'll be talking again tomorrow. Appreciate it. Coming up here on the show, Jussie Smolette, remember him? Telling his side of the story today on the stand in the trial where he's accused of planning a fake hate attack on himself. You heard from the brothers who say the actor paid them to carry out the crime. So what did Smolette say in his defense? We've got Ron Allen live with that after the break. Jussie Smolette is on trial, and today, for the very first time, jurors got to hear from the actor himself. He talked about his personal relationship with one of the brothers who he allegedly paid for this fake attack on him, saying that the check he paid him for was for personal training. Now, again, prosecutors have said this is the check that actually paid for that, again, apparently staged attack. At the time, Smolette had framed it as being anti-gay and racist. It comes after the prosecution came basically with receipts last week showing texts, calls, surveillance video from that night. And those two brothers stuck to their story, saying, hey, Smolette paid them to attack him before lying about it to police. NBC's Ron Allen is there in Chicago. So, Ron, what's interesting here, and you and I have talked about this in the context of other trials, putting a defendant on the stand in a high-profile case is sometimes risky and sometimes is a risky bet that pays off, right? What is your sense of the strategy from the defense here? Are they trying to make Smolette seem more sympathetic to the jury, do you think?
Most of the legal observers I've been hearing from and reading here in the analysis of all this seem to feel that Smolette had no choice but to testify. It's essentially come down to his word against the word of the two brothers, Asadarios, who were his associates, who were extras on the set of Empire, who were aspiring actors, who say that he paid them to rehearse and stage this attack. And so with the jury left with their version of events, Smolette went on the stand today to essentially give his version, and he is sticking to his story that he was attacked, that this was not a hoax, that this was not something that was staged, that was phony. He walked through what he described as the attack with his own attorney. Now, of course, he'll be cross-examined by the prosecution if the day continues. We're already late in the afternoon here, but I suspect this is going to go on for another couple of hours. But Smolette is essentially sticking to his story that he was a victim, that someone approached him wearing black, a ski mask that he could barely identify, that this person approached him very fast, and that they were yelling racial and homophobic slurs at him. And this is MAGA country statement that suggesting that this was a Trump supporter coming after him. Of course, the prosecution and police here say that this was all a hoax, that was all fake, designed to gain sympathetic publicity by Smolette for himself because he was upset about his pay and other conditions on the set of Empire, all of which Smolette in his direct examination is rejecting. That continues now at this hour, Hallie.
Ron Allen live for us there in Chicago. Ron, real quick before I let you go, timeline here. Do we think Smolette's going to be the last one to testify? We'll have the cross and then it goes to the jury?
Exactly. And all that could happen by tomorrow. The expectation is that could end, that this all could end tomorrow. The jury could be deliberating this tomorrow, and we could have a verdict before the end of the week or in a couple of days. So this could all wrap up very quickly. Yeah. Remember, it's taken 3 years to get to this point, almost 3 years, because this attack happened back in January of 2019, this alleged attack. So we're coming to the end of this after a very long grind. But the sides are dug in. The police, prosecutors insist that this was a hoax, it was a fake, and Smolette is sticking to his story that he's a victim.
We'll see what the jury says. Ron, in Chicago, thanks. Coming up here on the show, a Trump-era policy reinstated, making asylum seekers wait south of the border until their cases are heard. So why did the Biden administration revive something they didn't even like, this Remain in Mexico program? Gabe Gutierrez is on the ground in Tijuana to show us what that program looks like. Coming up. Does it ever feel like TikTok knows you maybe a little too well? It might. And Jake Ward's going to explain why, as we're getting a new and closer look at the app's algorithm. We're going to talk about that in a second. But first, let's get you over to the 5 stories our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, Kentucky Derby winner Medina Spirit collapsed and died after a workout today at Santa Anita Park in California. The horse's trainer, Bob Baffert, says Medina Spirit died from a heart attack. You might remember this horse failed a drug test after the Derby win back in May. Baffert, big name trainer, was suspended. Number 2, 3 more of those 17 missionaries kidnapped by a gang in Haiti have been released. The Christian Aid Ministries says all 3 of them seem to be in good spirits. It means 12 missionaries are still being held after 2 were let go last month. Number 3, Myanmar's deposed leader Aung San Suu Kyi has been sentenced to 2 years in prison after being convicted of incitement. For opposing a military takeover, she's still facing some other charges, too. She won the Nobel Prize in 1991 for fighting for democracy in Myanmar. Number 4, the National Weather Service says Hawaii may be in for some big-time flooding, maybe catastrophic, with a ton of rain pummeling the islands. They've got flash flood and high wind warnings in effect for a whole bunch of spots. The Hawaii County actually declared a state of emergency yesterday, with this rain set to go on until tomorrow. Number 5, as many as 900 bison are going to have to be removed from Yellowstone National Park this winter. Some are going to be put in quarantine or relocated, but because of this plan to prevent the bison from spreading disease to cattle, some of them may be shot by hunters. Starting today, migrants at the southern border who are looking for asylum in the United States are being told they're going to have to stay in Mexico while they wait for immigration court hearings. Sound familiar? It should. That's because President Biden is putting back in place former President Trump's Remain in Mexico policy. Not because he wants to. He actually doesn't. The president is opposed to this thing. But his hands have been essentially tied by the courts, with court orders saying he has to. It's coming as the Biden administration is trying to manage a surge of migrants at the border, with the number growing from 400,000 to about 1.7 million since 2020. There's a lot of context behind those numbers, which is why I want to bring in from Tijuana, Mexico, Gabe Gutierrez. Gabe, Friend, you have been to the border a whole bunch, reporting on this and many other stories. And I want to show folks, just so they have a sense of sort of where you are and what we're talking about, these crossing points we've been talking about. This Remain in Mexico policy will restart at the El Paso entry point, but it'll eventually cover 7 different ones. So, and you see them on screen here. This is the map. Talk to us, Gabe, about how this process works and what you've seen today.
Yeah, Hallie, that's right. Where I am right now is one of those crossings. This is Tijuana, Mexico, just across the border from San Isidro, really near San Diego. And there are hundreds of migrant families in this camp. And Hallie, I'm going to step out of the way and let my colleague, photojournalist Carlos Hassano, just kind of show you. And that's what I like to do, just so people that aren't familiar with these types of camps, they can really see the conditions that people are living here. This camp, you know, at one point had more than 1,000 people, now has several hundred. Migrant advocates, they're very concerned that what will end up happening is that camps like this will grow in size because of the reimplementation of what's known as MPP, Migrant Protection Protocols, more commonly known as the Remain in Mexico policy. And that's a policy, and you see those little kids waving there. And Hallie, it's something we see over and over again. You know, it's really heartbreaking to see some of these children that are here applying for asylum with their families. Many of them have been there for months, and this is something that, you know, we have seen over and over again, not just here in Tijuana, but also in Matamoros, Mexico, which is, you know, in South Texas. And what's different this time, Hallie, is the Biden administration has come out and said, look, we don't want to re-implement this policy, but we will include several humanitarian provisions, including, Hallie, is that these migrants are now supposed to have better access to legal counsel. Their asylum claims now, their asylum claims are supposed to be processed in about 6 months or so. But migrant advocates, they are very skeptical that this will actually bring any lasting change. And they are furious for the Biden administration not taking a harsher stand on this and not doing away with this Remain in Mexico policy. They have lost a lot of trust with the Biden administration in their view. That, coupled with Title 42, which is, you know, Hallie, you cover Washington, that's a public health rule implemented also by the Trump administration that has allowed the U.S. government to expel migrants. Those two things, this Remain in Mexico policy as well as Title 42, that has frustrated many of the migrant advocates here. But as you see behind me, Hallie, hundreds of families are here. The concern is that these camps will continue to grow, that there'll be a bottleneck at the border, even more so than there is now, and that could mushroom into a humanitarian crisis.
Gabe, before I let you go, you know, you cover this policy under the Trump umbrella. You're covering it now under the Biden umbrella. Does it, you explain some of the differences in policy, obviously. Does it feel different to you on the ground, or no?
Yeah, I got to tell you, Hallie, speaking with some of the migrants here, there's this overwhelming sense of confusion. They feel like they've been told a zillion different things. They don't really understand whether they're going to be able to make it into the U.S. or not. Yes, there are some policy differences, but the more you cover this, you know, the more things feel the same, in the sense that these are desperate migrants that have made the journey either from Central America or really now from across the world. And you constantly hear that they have been fed misinformation from human smugglers, that they've been, you know, gotten wrong information from whatever their sources are. And there's just this overwhelming sense of limbo and confusion here on the ground, no matter who is in office.
Gabe Gutierrez, it is really good to have you, I think. Give us that perspective on the ground from Mexico. We're grateful for your reporting, my friend. Thank you. Does it ever feel like TikTok knows you, like really knows you? Honestly, same. Their algorithm makes the content that pops up on the For You page to be, well, just for you. And in the past, we've heard from TikTok's parent company, giving us kind of those broad strokes about how this whole thing works. But for the most part, that algorithm recipe has been top secret until now. A new document seen by the New York Times is giving us a better understanding of why this app is so addictive. It's all about keeping you on there as long as possible. Because, stating the obvious here, that is a good thing for TikTok's business. We have to note NBC News has not viewed this document independently, but we do have some big questions about it, about tech. And when we do have those questions, Jake Ward always has the answers. He's joining us now. Jake, it's good to see you.
Hi, Hallie. Great to be with you. Thank you.
This document has a flowchart that I want to pull up now that kind of explains why TikTok can get you so hooked. I want you to walk us through what we're seeing on the screen here.
Well, what's so difficult about it, right, is thinking, how do we subdivide human behavior in a way that a computer could predict it? Well, this is, it turns out, one of the quick ways they try to shorthand it for people inside the company. That first box all the way there on the left is daily active users. That is the goal of any tech company. How many people can you get using your platform every day in an active way? Then next to that, time spent and retention. That's our goal, right? If we're a tech company, we're trying to get people to spend time there and to keep coming back. And from there, they begin to break it down into the quality of the videos in your For You feed. That is the personalized feed that you receive on TikTok. Then user interactions, how often people like and comment on a video, how much of the video they play. All of these things turn out to be a recipe that goes into what is essentially a score for each video. When those videos score highly enough, they get fed to you, and all of this becomes a way that TikTok essentially predicts what's going to do well on your feed, is going to get into your brain in such a way that you can't stop watching. And here's the thing I want to play for you, Hallie, is when you can't stop watching, and I have been in this position many times during the pandemic, right? It's about 11 o'clock.
Sure.
I'm starting to fade. I shouldn't be watching this thing anymore, right? A friendly face pops up, and here's what it says. Have a look.
I understand it's easy to keep watching videos, and trust me, I've been there before. Those videos will still be there tomorrow, so go get some extra sleep, turn your phone off, do yourself that favor, and have a great night.
So on the one hand, very, very humane of them to say, you know what, you should stop watching now. On the other hand, what this tells us, along with the document obtained by the New York Times, is just how well that company understands what you are doing and how every single thing you do on that platform tells them something important about how much you're going to come back and how much more time you're probably going to spend on their platform.
The addictive piece of this is so interesting, Jake, because as somebody who, like, listen, I'll be honest with you here. I use a lot of different social media platforms. I find TikTok to be, for me personally, the thing I just can't quit, right? But the algorithm, listen, all of these platforms have algorithms. Instagram has it. You know, they all. Is TikTok really doing something all that different, or is it just perceived like they're doing it better, basically?
Well, there are two things to consider. First of all, right, TikTok has over 1 billion daily active users. That is an incredible number of people. So that's an incredible amount of data to use to make predictions about how people who fit into the Hallie Jackson archetype, and I'm sorry, but you do have an archetype, or the Jacob Ward archetype, right? We have a category that is predictive. I know you're a unique person, I know, but you're not, it turns out, in the view of ByteDance, of TikTok. And here's the other thing. This is what TikTok has been so brilliant at. They have created a choreography for the creation of these videos. So much of these videos is not just a blank space that somebody has put their thoughts into, right? It is music that you are lip syncing to, or it is other people's sound that someone is enacting in some way, right? These memes that TikTok basically builds has created a way that they can predict what you're going to do because they knew it from the beginning. They were choreographing it from the beginning. Something about that, I think, is really what makes them different from all the other companies, Hallie.
If people weren't excited to read your new book before this, I certainly think they will be now. Jake Ward, The Loop comes out in January, all about how technology is creating a world without choices and how to fight back. Jake, we're glad to have you. We'll have you back before your pub date, I hope. Thank you. Coming up here, a Zoom call that honestly should have been an email or literally anything else. One CEO thought it was a good idea to fire 900 people on Zoom with no warning. And now the head of Bettercom, you guessed it, he's getting some heat. Zincle Esimwa has more on this. Plus, what's the craziest thing you ever found in your couch? $1? A Dorito? What about a 5-foot snake? That's what one Florida guy found in his. That's coming up in The Local. So we are learning today that former Senator Bob Dole, who died yesterday, will lie in state at the Capitol Rotunda later this week. He was known as a lion of the Senate. And our own Andrea Mitchell is going to join us for tonight's backstory to talk about what it was like covering him and share some really personal memories. We'll get to that in a second. But first, NBC News covers hundreds of stories each day. And because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. For our Northeast Bureau, 2 cars got destroyed during a wreck. early yesterday. They crashed into a restaurant in Philly's historic Old City. Look at this. One of the cars even caught on fire, sending flames shooting up into the air. No reports, luckily, that we've heard of any serious injuries. From our New York bureau, 4 people were hurt after the floor of a salon in the Bronx, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, collapsed into the basement. Workers there say they heard some really weird noises. They ran out right before the whole thing caved in under their feet. Some people were hurt, but not seriously. From our Southern bureau, you probably find some weird stuff in your couch. Maybe your phone slipped between the cushions. Think about reaching down there and pulling out a 5-foot snake. Yep, that happened in, guess the state, Florida, baby. A guy who called police to get a 5-foot-long red-tailed boa out of his brand new couch. They took the couch out of the house and then got the snake out of the house, took it to a local pet store. All right, it's bad enough to be on a Zoom call at work, right? Who likes that? What's worse? Getting fired on a Zoom. What's even worse than that? To get fired on a Zoom with 899 of your closest colleagues. But that is exactly what happened at the mortgage company Bettercom. 900 people fired during a Zoom meeting that lasted, are you ready for this? 3 minutes. Their boss blames the layoffs on the housing market, performances, productivity. But there are some reports the company got hundreds of millions of dollars from its backers right before the layoffs happened. Zingle Esimwa explains.
We have meetings that pop up all the time, but not usually some that come from the CEO.
Wade Sherman says he recently got a promotion and a raise.
I even had a manager meeting that morning, a one-on-one with my manager, and everything seemed to be good.
But on Wednesday, he and about 900 employees also got fired.
If you're on this call, you are part of the unlucky group being laid off.
In video verified by NBC, the CEO of Better.com, an online mortgage company, fired hundreds from its workforce.
It felt very disconnected. The way that the company's been going has been very positive, getting ready to go to IPO. So we're really excited.
The startup announced it's going public earlier this year, giving it a valuation of nearly $7 billion, described as a unicorn by Forbes and deemed the best startup in America for 2 years, according to LinkedIn. Better.com is not the first company to have a mass layoff. So why the strong reaction?
They just received a $750 million cash injection. It just seems unfair.
Gupta studies the impact of layoffs on employee retention.
In general, a layoff is going to get a strong reaction, whatever time it is. And right now it's COVID, and it's also right before the holidays.
Better CEO saying he made the decision himself, citing the market, performance, and productivity.
We are laying off about 15% of the company.
Then telling employees termination effective immediately, and HR would reach out on benefits and severance. Company CFO Kevin Ryan saying to NBC in part, layoffs were, quote, gut-wrenching, but needed as the company navigates, quote, a radically evolving homeownership market. This comes as the pandemic and unpredictable markets leave businesses and those who work for them on edge.
Which is the biggest thing that corporate America could do to regain the trust of Americans is to stop laying off people. Studies are inconclusive on whether or not layoffs are helpful. Then in terms of productivity and job satisfaction, that actually declines among survivors.
While not one of the surviving employees, Sherman isn't too critical of the nature of Better's firings, saying there has been strong solidarity for those laid off online.
Better's not the only company that has, gone through this. It's way different than what happened before the pandemic. This is a job seeker market, and hopefully we can rise to the occasion, if we will, and get something really good. Get something even better.
Oh, man. Zingle is joining us now. So, Zingle, listen, here's the thing. We have to Zoom. We have to get on these virtual calls. It's the pandemic, even post-pandemic. The way that we communicate, employers and employees, has changed now, right? I know you talked to some HR and jobs experts for this. Are these changes, some of them here to stay? Listen, this doesn't say you should be firing 900 people at once on Zoom, obviously. But I wonder what you heard from some of those experts.
Yeah, and Hallie, the Zoom fatigue is real. But what I'm hearing from experts is, first of all, employee agency is at an all-time high, right? We're seeing workers unionize. There's even the discourse around it is changing. There was a viral tweet just last week talking about employers asked for 3 to 4 references. I'm going to start asking for 3 to 4 happy employees, right? So the culture for employees is changing. But also employers are seeing the need for retention is very high. We've been talking about the Great Resignation. It's very hard to hire right now. And so all of this is playing into the COVID-era job market, Hallie.
Zingle Esimwa, great to have you covering that very interesting story for us today. Appreciate it. Time now to get to the backstory, our behind-the-scenes look at how a story comes together and how it fits into our bigger picture. Tonight, we're remembering a political giant here in Washington, Senator Bob Dole, who died over the weekend at 98 years old. Today, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer announced that Senator Dole will lie in state in the Capitol Rotunda later this week on Thursday. If you don't remember, Senator Dole served in Congress for more than 3 decades. He was the Republican leader for more than 10 years. He ran for president more than once, 3 times in all, and was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom for his political career and service to his country in World War II. Joining me now is somebody who covered Senator Dole during her time in Congress and on the campaign trail, the inimitable Andrea Mitchell. We're so glad to have you. Thank you.
It's the first time on set.
I was going to say welcome to your Hallie Jackson Now debut. The first of many, we hope.
It's beautiful, yes.
And I'm so glad to talk to you about this because, as you know, the backstory is really about your experience covering a story. And boy, was Senator Bob Dole a story. I met him a few times. I interviewed him in the convention in 2016, in passing here. But you covered the White House. You covered Capitol Hill for NBC News. You talked to him over and over again. What stands out to you? Do you have a favorite memory about his personality? How did he interact with you as reporters?
He was great. He was completely accessible. He was tough. Was a really partisan guy, as was George Mitchell, his counterpart, for much of the time that I was covering him. And they would call us in every single morning on the Senate floor with notebooks, pad and pencil, and tell us what was going to happen that day, because they would agree on the Senate agenda. No talk about getting 50, getting 60, filibusters, none of that.
Who's going to vote how,
It was all, like, this is what's going to come up, and we'll see where the votes fall, but this is what we're going to do that day. And the Senate had what they call, regular order. It was a much warmer place. There was a lot of tough politics, but Bob Dole believed in compromise. He believed in getting things done for the country. And so you would talk to him about the budget. He did a lot of things that were against his self-interest in some ways. He worked with Tom Harkin on the Americans for Disability Act because it was so near and dear to him. He was really disabled. It was very hard for him to get around. He couldn't dress himself.
In a wheelchair at the end of his days.
But I'm talking about it during the prime of his life, coming from his wounds. And, he worked on budget and Social Security issues with Democratic presidents and Democratic leaders. He just thought what was good for the country was good for Bob Dole and good for the Republican Party.
What's interesting is you described him. He was a partisan guy. He was
absolutely.
He was what he was. You talked to him in 2015, and we were struck by one particular moment in particular, and I want to play that for folks. We went to the archives, the recent archives, and pulled that sound. I want to play it.
I was in the Senate 28 plus years working with George Mitchell and Robert Byrd and Tom Daschle, Democratic leaders. And we never had an unkind word, never surprised each other by trying to sneak something through the Senate. We were D's and R's, but we were also friends. And that counts a lot.
What is so interesting about that, Andrea, he was partisan, as you said. He also had friends on the other side of the aisle. And that is something, we live in Washington. We cover Washington every day. I'm not often talking about, members from opposite parties who are legitimately friends. They exist, right? They're not total unicorns, but it seems like it's less common.
Much less common. And part of it, I was talking to Tom Daschle today, who was the Democratic leader, the counterpoint to Dole, and he said, look, we, first of all, did not have the money chase that we have now, which was really after the Supreme Court decisions, Citizens United. We were not raising money, running home to raise money all the time. We were staying in Washington. We were getting together. And things on the House side weren't gerrymandered to the incredible extent. Now, only 10% of House seats are up for grabs. The rest are safe, quote, safe seats because they've been so gerrymandered. So people have to appeal to the base. You didn't have social media. And that is probably the biggest factor. And people got along. But he also had this mordant wit and sense of humor.
Do you remember
which
specific?
Could be really, cutting, but also could be self-deprecating. Well, when Bill Clinton awarded him the Medal of Freedom, after Clinton had just defeated him for the presidency, and he got up there to accept this and said, I, Robert J. Dole, giving the acceptance, giving the oath to become president. And then he said, I kind of thought I'd be getting something else from Bill Clinton, like the keys to the front door at this time. He could make fun of himself even in defeat. And he was tough. One very particular moment was the toughest and kind of meanest side of him that you'd ever see. 1988, New Hampshire primary. He's just lost a bitter primary to George Herbert Walker Bush. Bush is sitting where you are with Tom Brokaw. I'm standing to the side watching.
Okay. So this is like on the NBC set in New Hampshire.
It's live on the set in New Hampshire, which is that big armory, that wonderful place we always are. And Brokaw says to Dole, who's doing this remote, so they're interviewing Dole about having just lost to Bush. He's sitting there. Brokaw says to Dole, you know, do you have anything to say to George Bush, the vice president? And he says, yeah, stop lying about my record. So he was bitter. He got over it. And he was resilient. That's what people really love about him. He's such a patriot.
Andrea Mitchell, it's so great to hear you be able to share some of those memories and some of that perspective from your years covering him. Thank you for coming on.
We love the backstory.
Come back soon for the backstory, for more of it. Andrea, thank you. Coming up here on the show, the DOJ taking on Texas, I should say, over voting rights, suing the state. Why? Over this Republican-drawn voting map and its effect on communities of color. My colleague Joshua Johnson's going to be here. By the way, his new show is launching tonight. Can't wait. We'll be right back. The Justice Department, we learned today, suing Texas now over voting maps drawn by Republicans. Here's the deal. The DOJ says Texas is discriminating against Latino and Black Texans, who are obviously becoming a bigger and bigger part of the population there, by not giving those communities the opportunity to choose their own representatives. Joshua Johnson, who launches his new show here on News Now tonight at 8, joins me now. First of all, hello, you beautiful set. That is gorgeous. Looks amazing. I want to save some time to talk about the show because I want to hear all about it. But quickly, I know this is one of the topics that you're going to be talking about tonight, right? Is this issue, because you've said you want this to be a space where people can meet in the middle on these really polarizing issues like this one.
Yeah, and this is a super polarizing issue, especially now that the Justice Department is formally accusing the state of Texas of redrawing voting districts in a way that allegedly dilutes the voting power of Black and Latino residents. So we'll be speaking to a reporter from the Texas Tribune, who is a demographics reporter, has been covering this very deeply. And then we'll talk about an aspect of the changing demographic, which is the term Latinx. There's some new polling out about how people of Hispanic origin feel about using that term to describe themselves. So two stories that are very much in our wheelhouse.
Tell me more about the show, right? I know that you want people to be engaged in these conversations that you're having. You want to hear from viewers. What are you excited about as you get ready for the launch coming up in just a few hours? I can't wait.
Yeah, I'm excited about creating a space where people can just kind of be heard. I mean, I have no problem with polarizing political conversation. I don't have a problem with the conflict. I have a problem with the lack of connection. And you should have an option, right? You should be able to say, I want to hear from my point of view for an hour. You should also be able to say, I just want to kind of unclench my fists for an hour and connect with other people, which is so sorely missing right now. That's what we're going to try to provide.
And just so people know, right, these are conversations that you're happening with people who aren't, it's not necessarily like our reporters, right, our NBC reporters. These are people who are affected by the issues that we're talking about.
Yeah, we're looking more for people's stories and their questions than for their opinions, because I've learned when someone's telling you their story, the only thing you can do is listen. It kind of centers the conversation in a different way. And then once we've talked about what's at stake, we can all chime in. But we're super easy to find on social media. We're at NBC Now Tonight. You can email us nowtonight@nbcnews.com. You can leave us a voicemail. There is literally no way not to be able to be part of this program.
Oh, my God, a voicemail. You're going old school with that. Come on now.
That's right, good old voicemail.
I'm going to leave you a voicemail tonight. Joshua Johnson, thank you so much. We are all cheering you on. We can't wait to watch tonight and every night at 8 o'clock Eastern on NBC News Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson. Thank you, friend. That's a wrap for this show. More Hallie Jackson Now for you tomorrow. Same time, same place. More coverage right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.